My name is Cassidy, 31 years old, and my ex-husband's new wife recently made the catastrophic mistake of calling me a financial abuser in public. I manage wealth for the top 1% of Chicago, which means I deal with aggressive corporate raiders, demanding tech billionaires, and ruthless real estate moguls on a daily basis. I do not intimidate easily. I certainly do not get intimidated by a woman who curates her entire personality for social media sympathy. Yet there I was, at the prestigious Pinecrest Academy Autumn Charity Gala, surrounded by the city's elite, about to become the main character in her fabricated tragedy. The evening started flawlessly. The crisp October air swept across the manicured grounds of the private school, carrying the scent of roasted chestnuts and expensive catering. Inside the grand ballroom, crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over a sea of designer gowns and tailored tuxedos. I stood near the ice sculpture, sipping sparkling water and quietly discussing a lucrative bond portfolio with Richard, a prominent venture capitalist, and one of my most valuable clients. Everything was perfectly professional. Everything was under control. Then I heard the sharp, frantic clicking of heels approaching from behind. I turned to see Paige, my ex-husband Bradley's new wife, marching directly toward me. She was 30 years old, dressed in a champagne silk gown that looked suspiciously like a wedding dress, and she was dragging an entourage of wide-eyed, wealthy mothers in her wake. I took a slow breath, bracing myself. Bradley and I had divorced 2 years ago because he was a charming, impulsive man who managed his finances like a reckless gambler. When I finally cut my losses, I took exactly what belonged to me, nothing more, nothing less. Bradley quickly moved on to Paige, a woman who specialized in playing the selfless martyr. Paige stopped 2 feet away from me. Her eyes were already brimming with perfectly timed tears. She took a deep, shuddering breath, ensuring that everyone within a 20-foot radius stopped talking and turned their attention to us. "Cassidy, how can you even show your face here tonight?" she asked, her voice trembling with manufactured grief. I kept my expression completely neutral. "Hello, Paige. I am attending because I sponsored a table for the charity auction. Now, if you will excuse me, I am in the middle of a conversation." I turned back to my client, but Paige aggressively stepped into my line of sight. "No, you do not get to walk away this time. You do not get to hide behind your fancy suits and your rich friends. Everyone here needs to know exactly what kind of monster you are." The surrounding conversations completely ceased. The string quartet playing softly in the corner suddenly sounded deafening. Wealthy parents, school board members, and my own clients stared at us in stunned silence. Paige let a single tear roll down her cheek. She pointed a trembling finger at me. "You are a financial abuser, Cassidy. You stripped Bradley of everything in the divorce. You drained his accounts. You took his assets. And now, because of your greedy, vindictive cruelty, Bradley cannot even afford the tuition for my 2 innocent boys. Mason and Logan might be thrown out of Pinecrest Academy next month because you decided to bleed us dry." Gasps rippled through the crowd. A few of the mothers standing behind Paige glared at me with visible disgust. The accusation was heavy calculated and designed to destroy my professional reputation in a room full of people who trusted me with their money. Calling a wealth manager a financial abuser is the equivalent of calling a surgeon a murderer. It was a direct strike at my livelihood. I looked at Paige. I looked at the tears streaking her perfectly applied makeup. I thought about the reality of my divorce. Bradley had squandered his own money on failed startup ideas and luxury cars he could not afford. I had spent our entire marriage trying to save him from bankruptcy. When I left, I simply took my own hard-earned assets and let him face the consequences of his own financial illiteracy. Now his new wife was weaponizing my success to cover for his failures. My client shifted uncomfortably beside me, clearly unsure if he should intervene or step away. I gave him a subtle, reassuring nod. Then I turned my full attention back to Paige. I did not raise my voice. I did not flush with anger or scramble to defend myself. Panic is for people who have something to hide. "Paige," I said, keeping my tone as cold and level as a frozen lake, "the divorce settlement is a matter of public record. Bradley walked away with exactly half of the marital assets we acquired together. If your husband has somehow managed to squander his half in less than 24 months, that is a testament to his staggering financial incompetence, not my cruelty. Paige opened her mouth to argue, but I took one step forward, forcing her to instinctively step back. Furthermore, I continued, my voice echoing clearly in the silent ballroom. Mason and Logan are your children from a previous relationship, not Bradley's. If you are relying on my ex-husband's depleted bank accounts to fund your children's elite private school tuition, I suggest you reevaluate your own financial independence instead of throwing a tantrum in a ballroom. I am a wealth manager, Paige. I fix portfolios. I do not fund another woman's poor life choices. The silence that followed was absolute. Paige stood frozen, her mouth opening and closing without any sound coming out. The sympathetic murmurs from her entourage instantly vanished, replaced by embarrassed, averted gazes. The brutal, undeniable logic of my words had entirely dismantled her emotional performance. She had expected me to yell, to cry, or to run away in shame. She had not expected me to dissect her financial parasitism in front of the very society she was trying to impress. I offered her a polite, entirely hollow smile. Now, if you will excuse me, I have actual money to manage. I turned my back on her, smoothly picking up my conversation with my client exactly where we had left off. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Paige's face flush a dark, angry red before she spun around and practically fled toward the lobby, leaving her entourage behind. I had won the battle, maintaining my dignity and my professional standing without breaking a sweat. 2 hours later, I left the gala feeling completely victorious. I handed my ticket to the valet and slipped into the quiet, leather-scented sanctuary of my car. The city lights of Chicago blurred past my windows as I drove toward my downtown apartment, my mind already shifting to the next day's market projections. The incident with Paige felt like a minor irritating glitch in an otherwise perfect evening. I had handled her with surgical precision, exposing her entitlement for the entire school board to see. I assumed that would be the end of it. I assumed she would retreat and find some other excuse for her financial woes. I was entirely wrong. As I pulled into the underground parking garage of my building, my phone vibrated in the cup holder. I glanced down, expecting an email from a client or a late-night message from my sister. Instead, the screen illuminated with a high-priority automated security alert from my primary banking institution. I picked up the phone and read the notification. My heart slammed against my ribs, and the quiet satisfaction of the evening instantly vanished into a cold, suffocating dread. The message was clear, undeniable, and utterly terrifying. A $400,000 mortgage loan taken out strictly under my name and tied directly to my personal assets had just been successfully disbursed. The recipient of the funds was listed as an educational trust account registered to Mason and Logan. Bradley and Paige had not just insulted me at a charity gala. They had actively stolen my financial identity. I took a slow sip of my sparkling water, maintaining my professional composure, as the ballroom slowly returned to its normal rhythm. I had won the battle, exposing her entitlement for the entire school board to see. I assumed that would be the end of her pathetic attempts to extort me. At exactly 8 o'clock the next morning, I walked through the heavy glass doors of my private bank in downtown Chicago. I had not slept a single minute, but my appearance gave nothing away. My hair was pulled into a severe, flawless twist, my designer trench coat was impeccably pressed, and my expression was entirely unreadable. I bypassed the main teller line and walked straight into the mahogany-paneled office of my senior account manager. He took one look at my face and immediately closed the door. I did not waste time with pleasantries. I slid my tablet across his desk, displaying the automated alert I had received the night before. I demanded to see the complete origination file for the $400,000 mortgage loan. My account manager, visibly sweating under my gaze, frantically typed on his keyboard and turned his monitor toward me. I leaned in my eyes, scanning the dense blocks of financial data. The loan had been executed purely digitally, completely, bypassing the need for a physical notary. I scrutinized the authorization logs, searching for the exact mechanism Bradley had used to breach my accounts. It took me less than 2 minutes to find the vulnerability. During our marriage, Bradley and I had shared a comprehensive joint financial profile. When we divorced, I meticulously severed every legal and financial tie. However, I discovered that Bradley had exploited a deeply buried loophole in the bank's legacy authentication system. He had used an outdated pre-divorce security token that had not been fully purged from their secondary servers, combined with my social security number and personal verification data he had memorized years ago. He had forged my digital signature with terrifying precision, routing the collateralized funds directly into a newly established trust account bearing the names of Paige's children. My account manager reached for his phone, his hand shaking slightly. "I am calling the fraud department right now, Cassidy. We need to freeze everything and get the Chicago police involved immediately. This is grand larceny." "Put the phone down," I commanded, my voice sharp enough to make him freeze. He stared at me in disbelief, but I was already running the risk assessment in my head. Calling the local police was the standard protocol, but it was also a strategic death sentence. I knew exactly how local fraud investigations operated. A detective would file a report, and it would sit on a crowded desk for weeks waiting for a subpoena. Eventually, a beat cop would call Bradley for a routine inquiry. The absolute second that happened, Paige would panic. She would know the authorities were circling, and she would instantly wire that $400,000 through a cryptocurrency tumbler or a labyrinth of offshore shell companies. Once that money crossed international lines recovering, it would transform from a domestic dispute into a jurisdictional nightmare. I would be left holding a massive debt while Paige and Bradley vanished the funds into thin air. I could not afford to tip my hand. I needed to know exactly where that money was resting right now, down to the specific routing number, before they even realized I was awake. I needed speed, absolute secrecy, and a level of digital precision that the local police simply could not provide. I needed a ghost. I instructed my account manager to place a silent internal hold on any further automated disbursements from my profile, expressly forbidding him from triggering any external fraud alerts. I walked out of the bank, stepping back into the biting morning wind, and pulled out my phone. I did not call a lawyer, and I did not call the authorities. I dialed my brother-in-law. Jamal is 32 years old, married to my younger sister Kendra, and happens to be one of the most brilliant forensic accountants working for the federal government. As a Black man navigating the highest, most competitive tiers of federal financial crime investigation, Jamal possessed a mind that operated 10 steps ahead of everyone else in the room. He spent his days dismantling international money laundering syndicates, tracking ghost assets for federal agencies, and turning invisible digital footprints into airtight criminal indictments. He answered on the second ring. "Good morning, Cassidy. What is broken?" I did not bother with small talk. I paced along the sidewalk, my voice low and focused. Bradley just took out a $400,000 mortgage against my assets. He exploited a legacy token from our pre-divorce profile and forged my digital signature. The disbursement was routed to a trust fund under Paige's kids. The line went silent for a fraction of a second. Then I heard the sharp, rhythmic clack of a mechanical keyboard in the background. Jamal had instantly shifted into work mode. "Are the local police involved?" he asked, his tone dropping into the serious, measured cadence of a federal investigator. "No," I replied. "If I send a uniform to Bradley's door, Paige will scramble the funds offshore before lunch. I need to know the exact trajectory of that money. I need to know where it landed, who controls the receiving account, and if they have started moving it. I need a backdoor trace off the books before I make my next move." I heard Jamal exhale slowly. Tracking my idiotic ex-husband would normally be child's play for him, but tapping into bank routing data required precision to avoid triggering the very security alarms I was trying to bypass. "Give me the loan origination ID and the exact timestamp of the disbursement," Jamal instructed, his keyboard clicking faster now. "Do not confront Bradley. Do not text Paige. Act completely normal. You go to work and manage your portfolios. Let me follow the digital paper trail. If they attempt to bounce this cash through secondary institutions, I will catch the footprint. I will call you the second I have a lock on the endpoint." I read the alphanumeric codes directly from the screenshots I had taken inside the bank. "Thank you, Jamal. We protect our own, Cassidy. I am on it." He ended the call. I slipped my phone back into my pocket, feeling a cold, calculating calm settle over my shoulders. Bradley and Paige thought they had executed the perfect crime. They believed they could leverage my financial standing to fund their delusions of grandeur, assuming I would be too embarrassed by the breach to fight back effectively. They had drastically miscalculated. I hailed a cab and directed the driver toward my office building, mentally preparing myself for the day. I was about to walk into my firm and smile at my colleagues as if my entire financial identity had not just been hijacked. I was ready to play the long game, waiting for Jamal to hand me the exact ammunition I needed to tear their fabricated life apart. The elevator doors glided open on the 40th floor, revealing the sleek, minimalist reception area of my firm. I stepped out, my posture perfectly rigid, my face a mask of effortless confidence. For the next 10 hours, I sat in my soundproof glass office, overlooking the Chicago River, moving millions of dollars for my clients. I negotiated municipal bond rates, analyzed tech sector futures, and smiled through 3 separate video conferences. I played my part flawlessly, compartmentalizing the burning reality that my own financial identity had been weaponized against me just hours prior. At exactly 2 in the afternoon, my private cell phone vibrated on my desk. The caller ID displayed Bradley. I let it ring 3 times. I pressed the record button on a secondary digital dictaphone I kept in my drawer for client compliance, then answered the call, keeping my voice utterly devoid of emotion. "Hello, Bradley." I heard a sharp, nervous exhale on the other end of the line. When he spoke, his voice was thick with forced bravado, a man desperately trying to sound like he held all the cards. "Cassidy, I assume you checked your bank alerts this morning?" I leaned back in my leather executive chair. "I did. I also noticed you decided to revive our old joint profile credentials. That constitutes wire fraud, Bradley." He let out a short, arrogant laugh. "It constitutes a clerical error, Cassidy. An oversight from the divorce paperwork. But let us skip the legal threats because we both know you are not going to call the cops. You are going to sit there and you are going to listen to me." I remained completely silent, letting the dead air stretch. Silence always made Bradley uncomfortable. It forced him to keep talking to fill the void with his own mistakes. "Paige and I are done playing games," he continued, his tone turning venomous. "You walked away from our marriage with a fortune, and you left me struggling to keep a roof over my new family. The $400,000 is a drop in the bucket for you, but it guarantees Mason and Logan get the education they deserve. You are going to assume that debt, Cassidy. You are going to pay off that mortgage silently, and you are going to walk away. And if I refuse," I asked calmly. "If you refuse, Paige goes straight to the media," Bradley snapped, reciting the threat as if he had rehearsed it in front of a mirror. "She has already drafted the press release. We have contacts at 2 major local news stations. You manage money for the richest people in Chicago. Your entire career relies on absolute trust and a pristine public image. How do you think your billionaire clients will react when my wife goes on morning television sobbing about how the elite, greedy wealth manager Cassidy forged documents to throw innocent children out of their private school? We will brand you as a vindictive monster. We will ruin your reputation before the police even finish taking your statement." The audacity of his blackmail was almost impressive. He was using the very fraud he committed to hold my public image hostage, relying on my need for professional discretion to force me into paying his stolen debt. "I see," I replied, keeping my tone perfectly measured to sound intimidated. "You have thought this through." "We have," he said, his voice dripping with satisfaction. "Do not test us, Cassidy. Accept the loan. Fund the trust. Consider it your final alimony payment to the man whose best years you wasted." He ended the call before I could respond. I ended the recording and locked the dictaphone back in my drawer. Bradley thought he had backed me into a corner, but he had just handed me a recorded confession of federal extortion. I did not panic. I simply went back to analyzing my spreadsheets, waiting for the real professional to do his job. Across the city in his fortified home office, my brother-in-law, Jamal, was waging a silent digital war. Through secure encrypted messaging, Jamal kept me updated on his progress. He possessed federal-grade clearance and a mind built for dismantling complex financial crimes. He spent the afternoon peeling back the security layers of the bank routing system, chasing the ghosts of my stolen money. Bradley and Paige had tried to be clever, utilizing masked IP addresses and digital tumbling services. But to a forensic accountant of Jamal's caliber, they were simply leaving muddy footprints across a clean white floor. I left the office at 7, returned to my apartment, and waited in the dark. The city below me sparkled with life, but my apartment was dead silent. I paced the hardwood floors, drinking black coffee, my phone resting on the kitchen island. At 2 in the morning, the screen finally illuminated. It was Jamal. I answered instantly. Tell me you have it. I have it, and it is infinitely worse than we thought, Jamal said, his deep voice crackling with intensity over the encrypted line. I spent the last 12 hours bypassing the initial receiving protocols. Bradley was incredibly sloppy with the initial transfer, but the secondary routing was sophisticated. That $400,000 did not sit in the educational trust account for more than 3 minutes. What do you mean? I asked, gripping the edge of the marble counter. I mean, the trust fund was a digital turnstile, Jamal explained. The second the bank cleared the mortgage disbursement, an automated script triggered. The funds were instantly bounced through a cryptocurrency exchange to wash the serial numbers, then immediately wired offshore. I tracked the final destination node to a private bank in the Cayman Islands. Bradley sent the money offshore, I asked, genuinely shocked that my financially inept ex-husband had managed such a complex maneuver. That is the catch, Cassidy, Jamal said, the sound of his fingers flying across his mechanical keyboard echoing through the speaker. Bradley did not send it. Bradley does not even have signature authority on the endpoint destination. I pulled the corporate registration for the offshore shell company receiving the funds. It is a completely private LLC. Bradley's name is nowhere on the foundational documents. Then who owns the shell company? Paige, Jamal stated flatly. Paige is the sole proprietor, the sole director, and the only authorized signatory. Bradley just committed federal wire fraud and extortion to secure that loan, but he does not control a single cent of the cash. His new wife completely bypassed him. The realization hit me like a physical strike. The fake tears at the charity gala, the dramatic story about school tuition, the aggressive blackmail phone call Bradley had just made. It was all an elaborate, multi-layered illusion. Paige had weaponized Bradley's resentment against me, convincing him to steal my financial profile under the guise of paying for her children's education. But she had zero intention of using that money for school. She was using my ex-husband as a disposable pawn to commit grand larceny, funneling the cash directly into her own secret offshore treasury. She is playing him, I whispered into the darkness of my kitchen. She set him up to take the entire legal fall. Exactly, Jamal confirmed. We have the routing numbers, the time-stamped wire transfers, and the shell company registration. I have locked the data packets into a secure drive. Whatever you want to do next, Cassidy, you have the loaded gun. I thanked Jamal and ended the call. I stood perfectly still, staring out at the Chicago skyline. Bradley thought he was a mastermind holding my career hostage. He had no idea he was standing on a trapdoor that his own wife had built. I was not just going to clear my name. I was going to let them destroy each other. The invitation arrived the following morning, disguised as an olive branch. An email from Bradley illuminated my screen just as I finished my morning espresso. The subject line simply read truce. He requested a sit-down at an upscale, hyper-modern coffee shop in the Gold Coast district. It was a highly public, meticulously curated environment entirely unsuited for screaming matches. It was the perfect stage for an ambush, and an even better venue for gathering irrefutable audio evidence. I chose my outfit with strategic precision. I wore a tailored charcoal blazer and sharp trousers that practically screamed unbothered, untouchable wealth. Before stepping out of my town car, I activated the high-fidelity recording application on my secured secondary phone, sliding the device deep into the breast pocket of my jacket. I was not walking blindly into an extortion trap. I was walking onto a soundstage of my own making, ready to let them dig their graves with their own words. The coffee shop was a symphony of hissing espresso machines and hushed corporate conversations. Bradley and Paige were already seated at a secluded corner booth. Paige wore an oversized, expensive cashmere sweater, sipping a matcha latte and projecting the aura of an exhausted but resilient mother. She looked infuriatingly smug. Bradley sat beside her, attempting to project executive dominance, but his posture was overly rigid. He looked like a man desperately trying to convince himself that he was the predator, not the prey. I slid into the sleek chair opposite them. I did not offer a greeting. I simply waited. Paige wasted no time. She reached into her designer tote bag and slid a thick manila folder across the polished marble table. "We are giving you a way out," Cassidy Bradley stated, leaning forward and lowering his voice to a dramatic conspiratorial whisper. I opened the folder. Inside lay a formal, legally drafted assumption of debt agreement. It outlined in dense legalese that I would willingly accept full financial responsibility for the newly issued $400,000 mortgage loan absolving Bradley of any liability. "It is very simple," Paige said, her voice dripping with artificial sympathy. "You sign the paperwork taking full legal responsibility for the loan. You fund my boy's tuition. In exchange, I will go on Instagram and TikTok today. I will post a heartfelt, emotional video saying it was all a massive misunderstanding. I will publicly clear your name. You get to keep your billionaire clients and your pristine reputation, and we get the financial support you owe us for wasting Bradley's best years." I looked at the two of them. Bradley, the arrogant fool who had just committed federal wire fraud by forging my digital signature. Paige, the serial grifter who had already successfully funneled the stolen cash into an offshore Cayman Islands shell company that Bradley did not even have signature authority over. The irony was so thick I could practically taste it in the roasted coffee air. Bradley thought he was extorting me. He had absolutely no idea his own wife was setting him up to take the sole fall for a decade-long federal prison sentence. I needed their demands articulated with crystal clarity for the recording resting in my pocket. "Let me make sure I fully understand the terms of this truce," I said, keeping my tone perfectly measured and inquisitive. "You utilized my pre-divorce credentials to forge my signature and secure a fraudulent mortgage against my personal assets. Now you are threatening to launch a defamatory media campaign against my professional firm unless I legally assume the debt you stole. Is that the exact arrangement?" "Do not use ugly words like stole," Bradley hissed, glancing nervously around the cafe to ensure no one was eavesdropping. "Think of it as a forced settlement. You sign the paper, Paige makes the public apology, and we all walk away clean. If you refuse, her video goes live to 500,000 followers by noon. Your career managing money for the elite will be over before the market closes." Paige smiled, tracing the rim of her ceramic cup with a perfectly manicured fingernail. "Come on, Cassidy, you are rich. 400,000 is pocket change for a wealth manager like you. Just pay for my kid's future and we will let you go back to your sad, lonely, career-obsessed little life. Consider it a donation to a real family." I looked down at the contract. They had actually paid an attorney to draft this extortion demand, foolishly creating a physical paper trail linking them directly to the blackmail. I looked at Bradley's expectant face flushed with misplaced victory, and then at Paige's triumphant, mocking smirk. I grasped the top edge of the thick document. With a slow, deliberate, and entirely calm motion, I tore the entire contract cleanly down the middle. Bradley flinched backward. Paige's smirk instantly vanished, replaced by genuine shock. I placed the two torn halves on top of each other and tore them again, the sharp ripping sound cutting through the ambient noise of the cafe. I let the shredded pieces of paper flutter down onto the marble table, piling them neatly right next to Paige's expensive latte. "There seems to be a fundamental misunderstanding about who currently holds the power at this table," I said, leaning in close enough that they could hear the absolute zero in my voice. "I do not negotiate with thieves. I do not submit to blackmail. And I certainly do not pay ransom to a woman who uses children as props to facilitate federal wire fraud." "You are making a massive mistake," Bradley threatened, though his voice wavered, the executive facade cracking under my unwavering stare. "She will ruin you." I stood up smoothly, adjusting my blazer. "Go ahead and post your little video page. Do your absolute worst. Scream to the internet about how cruel I am. But when the federal authorities come knocking, do not say I did not give you a chance to walk away." I turned and walked out of the coffee shop, my heels clicking rhythmically against the floor. I did not look back to see their reactions. I stepped out into the biting Chicago wind, the audio recording safely secured in my pocket. The trap was set, and I knew exactly what they would do next. The frigid air sweeping off Lake Michigan felt bracing against my face as I hailed a cab back to the financial district. I had barely settled into the plush leather back seat when my phone vibrated. Then it vibrated again. A second later, the device erupted into a continuous aggressive buzz that rattled against the car door armrest. It was not just a few notifications. It was a torrential digital downpour. I pulled the phone from my pocket and watched the lock screen light up with a rapid-fire sequence of alerts from Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. Unknown accounts were tagging me, leaving comments, and flooding my direct messages at a staggering rate. The volume was so intense that my phone screen actually stuttered trying to process the incoming data. I tapped the most recent notification and the application launched. There was Paige filling my screen. She was sitting in what looked like a modestly furnished, dimly lit bedroom, a stark contrast to the luxurious Gold Coast coffee shop she had been lounging in just 20 minutes prior. She was wearing a plain, slightly oversized gray sweater, her hair pulled back into a messy bun with a few loose strands framing her face. The production value was a masterpiece of manipulative perfection. She stared directly into the camera lens, her eyes glistening with expertly calibrated tears. "I never thought I would have to make a video like this," Paige whispered, her voice quivering with perfectly performed distress. "But my husband and I are completely out of options. His ex-wife, a high-powered Chicago wealth manager, is using her immense resources to systematically destroy our family. She manipulated the divorce, taking every last cent to fund her lavish lifestyle. And now my two little boys are being kicked out of their school because she orchestrated a financial freeze on the funds their father saved for them. She wants to see us on the street." The video abruptly cut to a carefully edited montage of her two sons looking despondent while sitting on a worn couch overlaid with somber, melancholic acoustic music. The caption below the video was a masterclass in modern digital assassination. It read, "Corporate greed is ruining our family. Please share to expose the financial abuse." She had tagged my personal accounts. She had tagged my firm. She had even tagged 3 prominent local Chicago news outlets and several major financial oversight boards. Below the video, the view count was skyrocketing in real time. 10,000 views, 50,000. By the time my cab pulled up to the curb outside my office building, the counter had crossed 250,000 views. The comments section had morphed into a ravenous digital mob. Strangers who knew absolutely nothing about my life were demanding my head on a platter. "Cancel her immediately. How can a woman be so heartless to innocent children? We need to contact her firm and demand they fire her right now. Someone find her home address." I sat in the back of the cab staring at the glowing screen. Bradley and Paige had moved much faster than I anticipated. They had clearly pre-recorded and meticulously edited this hit piece well before our coffee shop meeting ever took place. They thought this brutal public execution would break my spirit. They assumed I would panic, call them begging for a truce, and blindly sign the debt assumption contract just to stop the bleeding. They expected me to surrender my financial identity to save my social reputation. I paid the driver, stepped out of the vehicle, and walked through the revolving glass doors of my towering office building with my head held high and my posture unyielding. My phone was burning hot in the palm of my hand from the sheer processing load of the incoming hate mail. The receptionist at the front desk looked up as I walked into the main lobby. Her eyes were wide, and she quickly minimized a window on her computer monitor. She had clearly already seen the video. The low hum of chatter among the junior analysts completely ceased as I strode down the main corridor. I could feel dozens of eyes burning into my back. In the high-stakes world of wealth management, public perception is currency, and mine was currently crashing. I gave the room a curt, dismissive nod and marched straight into my corner office, firmly shutting the heavy glass door behind me. Before I could even hang my tailored coat on the rack, my desk phone began to ring. It was the private line, the one reserved strictly for my highest net worth clients. Immediately after, my email client pinged with an urgent meeting request from the senior managing partner of the firm. The subject line read simply, "Immediate PR crisis." The crisis had officially breached my professional walls. My livelihood, the career I had built through years of grueling 80-hour work weeks and flawless market analysis, was under direct assault by a woman who treated victimhood as a full-time occupation. I walked over to the desk, placing my continuously vibrating personal cell phone face down on the polished mahogany surface. I looked out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the sprawling Chicago skyline. Paige had played her opening move perfectly for the audience she was targeting. She had weaponized the deeply serious concept of financial abuse, twisting a term meant for real victims into a shield to protect her own grand larceny. She knew that on the internet, the first person to cry on camera automatically secures the moral high ground regardless of the actual facts. I took a deep, steadying breath, smoothing the lapels of my blazer, and picked up the ringing receiver. I was about to defend my entire professional existence. But beneath the stress, a cold, sharp anticipation was already taking root. They had thrown the first punch in public, which meant when I finally retaliated with the absolute truth, there would be nowhere left for them to hide. The blinking red light on my desk console was the first indication that the digital mob had breached the real world. My managing partner Thomas did not bother knocking. He pushed through my heavy glass door, his usually impeccable posture stiff with poorly concealed panic. Cassidy, the Crestview family office, just called, Thomas said, pacing the length of my office. They are demanding a full audit of their portfolio. We have 3 board members from the hospital foundation threatening to pull their accounts by the end of the day. You are trending on social media for financially abusing children. I maintained my grip on my pen, finishing the signature on a trade authorization before looking up. Thomas, sit down. He stopped pacing but remained standing, his hands planted firmly on his hips. The firm is getting dragged into a public relations nightmare. I need to know exactly what is going on before I have to draft a termination letter to save our corporate image. The woman in that video is my ex-husband's new wife, I stated, my voice projecting absolute authority. She is currently attempting to extort me because she and her husband committed federal wire fraud this morning. They forged my digital signature to illegally secure a $400,000 mortgage against my personal assets. The video is retaliation because I just met with them and refused to legally assume their stolen debt. Thomas stared at me, the color draining from his face. Federal wire fraud, Cassidy. If the authorities get involved and drag the firm into a subpoena, our clients will scatter. The authorities are not dragging the firm into anything, I interrupted, smoothly rising from my desk to meet his eye level. I am handling this internally. I already have a federal forensic accountant tracking the offshore shell company where she hid the stolen money. If we panic and issue a public apology, we validate a criminal's extortion attempt and make this firm look incredibly weak. I need 48 hours to secure the digital footprint and hand the perpetrators over to federal authorities on a silver platter. Until then, you tell the board that the video is a documented extortion tactic under active federal investigation. That will immediately shut them up. Thomas took a deep breath, smoothing his tie. He had trusted my financial instincts for 7 years, and my portfolios had generated billions for his firm. He knew I did not bluff. 48 hours, Cassidy. Not a minute more. Keep the firm out of the blast radius. I left the financial district as the sun began to dip below the skyline, casting long, sharp shadows across the concrete. I drove straight to the suburbs, navigating the quiet, tree-lined streets, until I pulled into the driveway of my sister Kendra and my brother-in-law Jamal. Kendra opened the door before I even reached the porch. She pulled me into a fierce, grounding hug. I saw the video, Kendra said, her voice vibrating with protective anger. I am ready to drive downtown and drag that woman out of her house. I offered my sister a tired but genuine smile. Physical violence will not get my money back. We are going to destroy her with data. Kendra led me down the hall to Jamal's workspace. It was a fortress of glowing monitors and federal-grade decryption hardware. Jamal was already seated in his ergonomic chair, his eyes fixed on cascading lines of code. As a federal financial investigator, Jamal lived for the thrill of hunting down ghost assets. How is the public execution treating you? Jamal asked without looking away from his screens. My boss gave me 2 days to extinguish the fire before the firm cuts me loose, I replied, taking a seat beside him. We are done playing defense. Tracing the money proved that Bradley is nothing more than a disposable pawn. Paige orchestrated this entire scheme. I want to know exactly who she is. Jamal cracked his knuckles, a sharp sound in the quiet room. Way ahead of you. When I found the offshore shell company registered in her name, I started running her credentials through the federal databases. Paige presents herself online as a struggling, devoted mother who was victimized by her circumstances. The digital footprint tells a vastly different story. He tapped a key and a complex web of legal documents, banknotes, and public records filled the largest monitor. Paige has done an exceptional job of scrubbing her recent social media history, Jamal explained, pointing to a series of redacted court filings. But she cannot erase county clerk records. Before she married Bradley, she went by 2 different legal names in 2 different states. Kendra leaned over my shoulder, her eyes narrowing. She has been married twice before Bradley. Yes, Jamal confirmed. First in Arizona, then in Florida. Both marriages ended in highly contentious, sealed divorces. And in both cases, the ex-husbands filed for bankruptcy less than 6 months after the divorce was finalized. I stared at the screen, a cold realization washing over me. Paige was not a desperate housewife making a reckless mistake to pay for private school. She was a seasoned professional. She had a refined, calculated methodology. She found men with fragile egos and terrible financial habits, married them, drained their assets under the guise of providing for her children, and then left them to face financial ruin completely alone. Bradley was simply her latest mark. Dig deeper into those bankruptcy filings, I instructed, my voice hardening with resolve. I want to see the exact structure of the debt her previous husbands were left holding. I guarantee we will find the exact same pattern: educational trusts, sudden mortgage loans, and offshore wire transfers. Jamal nodded, his fingers already flying across the keyboard. I am pulling the unsealed creditor claims now. If she used the same blueprint to bankrupt those men, we can establish a legally binding pattern of serial fraud. We were no longer just trying to clear my name. We were actively building a federal indictment. Paige thought she could use the internet to shame me into submission. She failed to realize that by picking a fight with me, she had just invited a federal investigator and a top-tier wealth manager to tear apart the dark, hidden corners of her entire existence. The glow from Jamal's massive curved monitors cast long shadows against the walls of his home office. He typed with a relentless, rhythmic precision, pulling up unsealed court documents from federal databases that the average civilian did not even know existed. Kendra stood behind him, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, while I leaned in close to the screen, my eyes tracing the financial ruin of the men who had come before Bradley. "We are looking at a masterclass in parasitic extraction," Jamal said, his voice dropping into the clinical tone he used when briefing federal prosecutors. "Look at target number 1, a mid-level real estate developer in Scottsdale, Arizona. He married Paige 7 years ago. 9 months into the marriage, he took out a massive second mortgage on his commercial properties to fund a private educational trust for her children." Jamal tapped a key, bringing up a bank routing schematic that looked chillingly familiar. "The money sat in the trust for less than 24 hours, Jamal continued. Then it was immediately wired to a limited liability company registered in the Bahamas. 60 days later, Paige filed for a highly contentious divorce, claiming irreconcilable differences and citing his sudden financial instability. He filed for bankruptcy the following spring. I stared at the digitized court filings. And the second husband, a logistics director in Tampa, Florida, Jamal said, pulling up a new batch of documents, married her 4 years ago. The timeline is almost identical. 11 months into the marriage, he liquidated his early retirement account's penalty fees, and all to fund a special welfare trust for her boys. The funds bounced through a crypto exchange and landed in a Panamanian shell company. Paige divorced him 3 months later. He is currently living in a rented trailer, completely drowning in debt. Kendra shook her head in absolute disgust. She is not a struggling mother. She is a professional predator. She finds men with fragile egos, makes them feel like heroic providers, and then convinces them to financially gut themselves to prove their devotion. It is the exact same blueprint I noted tracing the timeline on the screen. The emotional manipulation, using her children's future as leverage. The sudden, reckless liquidation of assets. The offshore wire transfers. She has perfected this routine. She runs the exact same scam, changes states, and finds a new mark. But there was a distinct difference this time, and the realization hit me with the force of a freight train. "Wait," I said, straightening up and stepping back from the monitors. "The Arizona developer and the Florida logistics director destroyed their own wealth. They legally ruined themselves. Bradley does not have any wealth left to destroy. I took my assets in the divorce and he blew through his half." Jamal turned his chair to face me, his expression grave. "Exactly. Bradley is completely broke. So Paige had to adapt her methodology. She could not convince him to liquidate his own assets because he has none. Instead, she convinced him to steal yours." The sheer diabolical brilliance of her plans suddenly crystallized in my mind. The viral video, the public accusations of financial abuse, the blackmail contract at the coffee shop. I had been looking at the situation entirely backward. I thought Paige was attacking me to get my money. But I was never her primary target. I was simply the bank. Bradley is the actuals, Mark. I said the words, tasting cold and sharp as I spoke them aloud. Think about the mechanics of the wire fraud. Bradley used his personal device. He used our old joint profile credentials. He committed the digital forgery using my social security number. Bradley's digital fingerprints are all over the domestic side of this crime. Jamal nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. And Paige's name is nowhere on the fraudulent loan application. She only exists on the receiving end, safe behind the impenetrable walls of an offshore Cayman Islands shell company. She set him up to take the sole legal fall, I stated, a genuine sense of awe mingling with my disgust. Bradley thinks they are partners in this grand extortion scheme against me. He called me today, bragging about how they were going to ruin my career. He actually believes he is the mastermind. But Paige is letting him do all the heavy lifting. The second the federal authorities trace that forged signature, Bradley goes to prison for a decade. Paige will claim she had absolutely no idea her husband resorted to identity theft to fund her children's schooling. She will play the victimized wife perfectly. She will file for divorce, keep the stolen $400,000 hidden offshore, and leave Bradley to rot in a federal cell. Kendra let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. She is playing him for an absolute fool. She managed to weaponize his hatred for you to convince him to commit a federal crime on her behalf. And he fell for it blindly, I added, shaking my head at the staggering depths of my ex-husband's stupidity. His ego was so bruised by our divorce, so desperate to prove he was a big-shot provider for his new wife, that he willingly walked right into a federal trap. He handed Paige a loaded gun, pointed it at his own head, and pulled the trigger for her. Jamal turned back to his monitors, saving the unsealed bankruptcy filings into our encrypted evidence folder. We have her entire playbook, Cassidy. We can prove she has done this twice before. We can establish a clear, documented pattern of serial fraud. If we hand this to the authorities, Paige goes down right next to Bradley. She will not be able to play the innocent wife routine when the feds see her history. I looked at the glowing screens, calculating my next move. The defensive panic that had gripped my firm earlier today felt completely irrelevant now. I held the keys to their mutual destruction. But handing the file directly to the authorities felt too quiet. Paige had chosen to humiliate me in front of my clients. She had launched a viral campaign to brand me as a monster to the entire world. She wanted a public execution. Print everything, Jamal. I commanded, my voice resolute and uncompromising. Print the Arizona bankruptcies. Print the Florida trust fund transfers. Print the Cayman Islands corporate registry proving she owns the shell company. I want a physical hard copy of every single lie she has ever told. What is the play here? Kendra asked, watching me with a mixture of concern and anticipation. Bradley is going to try to legitimize his extortion, I explained. He needs me to look like the villain to justify whatever legal moves he makes next to secure that money. He will try to use the family court system to force my hand, probably, by filing a motion to alter our post-divorce settlement based on my supposed financial abuse. I am going to let him do it. I am going to walk into that mediation room and let him think he has backed me into a corner. I want him feeling so invincible, so utterly confident in his victory, that he hangs himself with his own rope. Jamal printed the documents, the machine humming steadily in the corner of the room. You are playing a very dangerous game with a man who has nothing to lose, Cassidy. He has his freedom to lose, I corrected. And right now he is blissfully unaware that his new wife is preparing to steal it. I am going to let him dig the hole as deep as possible. Because when the truth finally comes out, I want them to look each other in the eye and realize exactly what they have done. I gathered the freshly printed dossiers, sliding them into a sleek leather portfolio. The narrative was shifting. The hunted was now the hunter. 2 days later, a process server handed me a thick manila envelope right outside my apartment building. Bradley had officially filed an emergency motion in Cook County Family Court. High on the adrenaline of his wife's viral internet campaign, he was demanding a complete restructuring of our post-divorce financial settlement. The legal filing was a masterpiece of manufactured victimhood. He cited my supposed financial abuse, claiming it had caused him severe economic and emotional distress. He requested substantial monthly alimony, along with a full reimbursement of the $400,000 loan he had actually stolen from my accounts. He genuinely believed the massive public outrage had broken my spirit. He assumed I would settle out of court immediately, just to stop the bleeding of my professional reputation. He requested a mandatory mediation hearing to force my hand, and I instantly agreed to the date. When the morning of the mediation arrived, I completely abandoned my usual corporate armor. I left my tailored razor-sharp suits hanging in the dark of my closet. Instead, I chose a slightly oversized muted beige cardigan and flat, sensible shoes. I deliberately skipped my morning espresso, wore absolutely no makeup, and pulled my hair back into a loose, unkempt knot. I spent 20 minutes standing in front of my bathroom mirror, meticulously practicing the exact posture of a woman who was buckling under the crushing weight of public humiliation. I dropped my shoulders, softened my gaze, and let a hollow exhaustion settle into my features. By the time I walked through the heavy metal detectors at the downtown courthouse, I looked fragile, overwhelmed, and utterly defeated. It was the exact version of me that Bradley desperately needed to see. He was waiting for me outside the mediation room, practically vibrating with arrogance. He wore a sharp navy suit, a crisp silk tie, and a smug, victorious grin that stretched from ear to ear. Because family court mediation is strictly confidential, Paige was not allowed inside the room. This meant Bradley was flying completely solo, entirely stripped of the mastermind who had been pulling his strings. When he saw me slowly approach down the long corridor, his chest puffed out with obvious pride. He looked me up and down, clearly relishing my disheveled, exhausted appearance. He thought he had already won the war. We sat at a long wooden table across from a court-appointed mediator, a stern, gray-haired man who simply wanted to process the paperwork and clear his crowded morning docket. I kept my shoulders slumped, staring down at my hands, letting my fingers tremble just enough to be noticeable. Bradley took the lead immediately. He dominated the small room, his voice booming with artificial confidence as he painted himself as the tragic hero. He talked at length about how my greed was destroying his new family, how the stress of my financial cruelty was tearing him apart, and how he simply wanted what was fair to protect his innocent stepsons. I played my part flawlessly. I offered no sharp retorts. I did not mention the offshore accounts, the forged digital signature, or the Cayman Islands shell company. I simply nodded, letting my voice crack slightly when I finally spoke. "I am just so tired, Bradley," I whispered, looking up at him with wide, defeated eyes. The videos, the hateful messages, the phone calls to my firm. My clients are threatening to leave me. I cannot fight this public battle anymore. I just want all of this noise to end. The psychological effect on him was instantaneous and absolute. His posture relaxed entirely. The aggressive defensive edge in his voice melted into a patronizing, triumphant purr. He leaned across the heavy wooden table, looking at me like a predator examining a wounded, helpless bird. He truly believed he had broken a top-tier Chicago wealth manager. "You brought this on yourself, Cassidy," he said smoothly, savoring every single syllable. "But we can make all the noise go away today. You just have to do the right thing." The mediator cleared his throat, opening a fresh empty file folder on the table. "Before we discuss any specific financial modifications to your settlement, the court requires fully updated financial disclosures from both parties. These are sworn affidavits submitted under penalty of perjury. I need your current assets, your complete liabilities, and a detailed record of any recent major financial transactions." I slowly slid my authentic, legally sound portfolio across the table to the mediator. Bradley did not even hesitate. Blinded by his own massive ego and completely disarmed by my theatrical performance, he confidently reached down into his expensive leather briefcase. He pulled out a thick stack of freshly printed financial documents and slid them directly over the polished wood, right into the hands of the mediator. I watched the papers glide across the table, my heart beating a steady, victorious rhythm in my chest. I knew exactly what was inside that stack. Bradley had just willingly submitted entirely falsified financial records to an official officer of the court. He had deliberately hidden the stolen $400,000 omitted Page's offshore shell company and blatantly lied about his current assets and liabilities on a federal document. He thought he was outsmarting the system to secure a massive payout. Instead, by voluntarily handing over those forged papers while sitting in a court-mandated hearing, he had officially committed felony perjury on the record. He had locked himself in a legal cage, and I was holding the only key. The mediator accepts the thick stack of documents from Bradley, his eyes briefly scanning the top page before he excuses himself to make official copies for the court file. The heavy oak door clicks shut behind him, leaving Bradley and me alone in the suffocating silence of the small conference room. Bradley immediately leans back in his chair, crossing his arms behind his head in a display of supreme, unearned dominance. He actually winks at me. He genuinely thinks his fabricated numbers have secured his ultimate victory over my career. When the mediator returns and slides my copy of Bradley's sworn financial affidavit across the table, I do not immediately look at the liabilities section. I already know he omitted the stolen $400,000 mortgage. I already know that specific federal crime is secured in his silence. Instead, I let my wealth manager instincts take over. I do not just read the numbers on the page, I read the narrative they construct. Financial disclosures are a precise roadmap of human behavior, and Bradley's map is a chaotic, desperate mess. I scan the granular data, bypassing the inflated expenses and fabricated lifestyle costs. I look deeply into the secondary accounts, the obscure equity lines he claimed as his own personal burdens. It takes me less than 3 minutes to find the anomaly. It is buried on page 14, deliberately camouflaged beneath a series of mundane credit card balances and an outstanding auto loan. It is listed as a secured personal line of credit, heavily drawn upon over the last 6 months. But the routing prefix and the institutional holding identifier attached to the debt do not belong to a standard commercial bank. They belong to the Illinois State Teachers Retirement System. I freeze, my eyes locked on the 11-digit account number. I know that exact number. Ruth is 60 years old. She worked for 35 grueling years as a public school administrator, carefully saving every single dime for her retirement. She lives a modest, quiet life in the suburbs, entirely dependent on that specific pension fund. During our marriage, I had personally helped her structure that trust to ensure she would never have to worry about money in her golden years. I look closer at the disclosure document, my heart turning to absolute ice. Bradley has listed the entire balance of Ruth's pension as collateral against a massive high-interest personal loan, a loan that his own paperwork now shows as completely liquidated. The math clicks together in my head with terrifying clarity. Paige had drained Bradley's half of our divorce settlement within a single year. But Paige is a bottomless pit of financial demands. She requires constant infusions of cash to maintain her affluent, curated social media persona. When Bradley ran out of his own money, he was too terrified of losing her to admit he was broke. He could not bear the thought of his manipulative new wife seeing him as a failure. So before he resorted to forging my digital signature for the $400,000 mortgage, he found a softer, more trusting target. Or he went after his own mother. As Ruth's designated financial power of attorney, a position she granted him years ago when her health briefly faltered, Bradley had the legal authority to manage her assets. He had weaponized that immense trust. He had quietly siphoned the equity out of her retirement account to appease Paige's relentless appetite for luxury. He had legally bound an elderly woman to a predatory debt structure she knew absolutely nothing about. According to the numbers printed in black and white on the court document in front of me, Ruth's pension was entirely compromised. One missed payment on that massive line of credit, and the bank would automatically seize her monthly income. Bradley had put his own mother on the brink of total, inescapable ruin, leaving a 60-year-old woman virtually destitute just to buy designer bags and luxury vacations for Paige. I look up from the paperwork. Bradley is currently scrolling through his phone, a confident smirk playing on his lips. He is utterly oblivious to the magnitude of the mistake he just made. By including that collateralized line of credit in his sworn financial disclosure, attempting to use the massive debt to artificially lower his overall net worth and secure a higher alimony payout from me, he has inadvertently handed me written signed proof of elder financial abuse. My disgust is so profound it borders on physical nausea. Stealing from a wealthy ex-wife who has the resources and the federal connections to fight back is one thing. Quietly executing the financial ruin of your own mother, a woman who dotes on you and trusts you implicitly, is an entirely different level of depravity. Paige had truly turned him into a monster, but Bradley had willingly picked up the shovel to dig his mother's grave. The mediator clears his throat, interrupting my realization. He looks at me over his reading glasses, his pen hovering over the official record. Do you need more time to review the petitioner's disclosures, Cassidy? We can schedule a follow-up session if you feel overwhelmed by the current financial landscape. I look at the mediator, then at Bradley. Bradley raises an eyebrow silently, daring me to fight back. He wants me to argue. He wants me to point out the missing $400,000 so he can unleash his media threat and destroy my firm. But I am not going to give him the satisfaction. I am playing a much larger, much more devastating game. No, I say, my voice perfectly soft and submissive. I think I understand his financial situation completely. I do not wish to contest these documents today. I just need some time to evaluate my options. Bradley's grin widens. He practically vibrates with victory in his chair. He thinks I am unconditionally surrendering. He thinks the viral video broke my spirit, and that his falsified paperwork has sealed my fate. He eagerly signs the mediation summary, confirming that his disclosures are entirely accurate under penalty of perjury. I sign my own paperwork with a deliberately unsteady hand. The mediator adjourns the session, officially entering Bradley's forged documents into the permanent court record. The legal trap is now securely locked. As we walk out of the courthouse and into the bustling Chicago afternoon, Bradley falls into step beside me. He leans in close, his voice dripping with arrogance and condescension. You did the right thing in there, Cassidy. Just transfer the funds to the trust by Friday and Paige will post her apology video. We can all move on. I stop on the sidewalk, turning to face him. The autumn wind whips around us, but I feel absolutely nothing but cold, absolute focus. I look at this man I once shared a life with, marveling at his staggering ignorance. I will be in touch, Bradley, I say, keeping my expression perfectly blank. I watch him walk away, his steps light and energetic, heading toward the parking garage. He is rushing back to Paige, eager to celebrate a triumph that does not actually exist. I pull my phone from my purse. I do not call my office and I do not call Jamal. I pull up the contact information for a modest suburban address. I need to make a personal visit before the banks realize what Bradley has done. I need to speak to his mother. The drive to the western suburbs takes 45 minutes, but the transition feels like crossing into a completely different world. The towering glass and steel of the Chicago financial district gives way to quiet, tree-lined streets and modest single-story homes. I pull my car up to the curb outside a neat, meticulously maintained house with a small wraparound porch. This is where Bradley grew up. This is where his mother Ruth has lived for the past 30 years. I walk up the concrete path, my leather portfolio tucked securely under my arm. I ring the doorbell and wait, listening to the faint sound of a television playing inside. A moment later, the door swings open. Ruth stands in the entryway wearing a comfortable knit sweater and holding a watering can. Her welcoming expression instantly evaporates the moment she recognizes my face. Her posture goes rigid, and her grip on the watering can tightens until her knuckles turn white. "Cassidy," she says, her voice thick with defensive hostility. "I am surprised you have the nerve to show up here after the stunt you pulled with that video online. Bradley told me everything about your little financial games." I do not react to her anger. I look at this 60-year-old woman who spent 3.5 decades working as a public school administrator, saving every single paycheck to ensure she would not be a burden to anyone in her old age. She is fiercely loyal to her son, entirely blinded by a mother's unconditional love. Bradley has clearly fed her a fabricated narrative, painting me as the vindictive ex-wife trying to destroy his new perfect family. "Hello, Ruth," I say, keeping my tone incredibly gentle and steady. "I am not here to argue about my divorce. I am here because your entire life savings are currently in critical danger, and your son is the one holding the match." Ruth scoffs, a bitter, protective sound. "Do not stand on my porch and insult my son. Bradley is a good man. You are just bitter because he moved on and found a woman who actually values family over a corporate paycheck. Paige is a wonderful mother, and they are struggling right now because of your greed. Please leave my property before I call the police." She begins to close the door, but I gently place my hand against the wooden frame. I look directly into her eyes, letting all of my professional armor drop, showing her nothing but genuine, profound sympathy. "Ruth, please listen to me," I say softly. "I do not care about Bradley's new marriage, but I do care about you. I helped you structure your retirement trust 4 years ago. I know exactly how much security you need to survive. Bradley just submitted a sworn financial affidavit to the family court. I have the documents right here in my hands. He collateralized your entire Illinois state teacher's pension to take out a massive line of credit, and he has already drained it to zero. The hostility in her eyes flickers, replaced by a sudden sharp flash of confusion. She stops pushing against the door. What are you talking about? Bradley would never touch my pension. He is my financial power of attorney just in case of medical emergencies. He knows that money is all I have left. Let me show you the paperwork I offer, stepping back slightly to give her space. Just give me 5 minutes inside. If you read the bank statements and still want me to leave, I will walk away and never bother you again. But you need to see what he did before the bank seizes your income. Ruth hesitates, her loyalty warring with a deep, creeping sense of dread. Slowly, she opens the door wider and gestures for me to step into the living room. The house is perfectly clean, filled with framed photographs of Bradley at his high school graduation, his college commencement, and his wedding to Paige. There are no pictures of me, which I completely expected. We sit down at her small dining table. I open my leather portfolio and extract the copies of Bradley's sworn financial disclosure alongside the routing traces Jamal had printed for me. I slide the heavy stack of paper across the table, tapping my finger directly on page 14. Look right here, Ruth, I instruct gently. This is the list of Bradley's current personal liabilities submitted under penalty of perjury. He listed a secured line of credit. Look at the institutional holding identifier. That is your specific pension account. He used your retirement as collateral. Ruth puts on her reading glasses, her hands beginning to shake slightly as she reads the document. Her eyes scan the 11-digit account number. I can see the exact moment the denial starts to crack. She shakes her head, refusing to accept the reality printed in black and white. No, this must be a mistake, she stammers, her voice losing all its previous venom. Bradley told me he needed to move some things around for a temporary investment. He said it was just a paperwork formality to secure a better interest rate for a new business venture. He promised me my money was completely safe. He lied to you, Ruth, I say, pulling out the second set of documents. He did not use this money for an investment. He used it to fund Paige's extravagant lifestyle when he ran out of his own money. Paige demands luxury, and Bradley was too terrified of losing her to admit he was broke. When he could not afford her demands, he went to the easiest target he could find. He went to you. I slide Jamal's routing trace across the table. I show her the exact trajectory of her life savings. I point out the date Bradley initiated the loan against her pension, the massive withdrawals that followed, and the final destination of those funds. I show her the corporate registry proving that the money was funneled directly into a Cayman Islands shell company wholly owned and operated by Paige. Ruth stares at the offshore transfer logs. The numbers blur as tears begin to pool in her eyes. The fierce protective mother who had answered the door just 10 minutes ago completely vanishes. In her place sits a devastated, terrified woman realizing her golden child has sold her future to a serial grifter. He promised me, Ruth whispers, a single tear spilling over her eyelashes and dropping onto the financial records. He sat right in that chair and swore on his father's grave that my pension would remain untouched. I trusted him. I gave him the power of attorney because I trusted my own son. How could he do this to me? How could he leave me with nothing? Because Paige manipulated him, and he was too weak to say no. I reply, reaching across the table to gently squeeze her trembling hand. She is using him to steal your money, and she is setting him up to take the legal fall for all of it. Bradley is a fool, Ruth. But you do not deserve to lose your home and your survival because of his staggering stupidity. We can still stop them. We can prove that he abused his fiduciary duty, and we can freeze that offshore account before Paige vanishes with your retirement. Ruth pulls her hand away and covers her face, her shoulders shaking with deep, agonizing sobs. The reality of her son's profound betrayal breaks her completely. I sit in silence, allowing her the space to mourn the illusion of the son she thought she raised. I know exactly how much it hurts to realize the person you trusted is entirely hollow inside. After several minutes, Ruth takes a shuddering breath and wipes her face with the sleeve of her sweater. She looks up at me, her eyes red and swollen, but a sudden desperate resolve hardens her features. She pushes her chair back from the table and stands up. "Wait right here, Cassidy," Ruth says, her voice thick with emotion but steady with absolute determination. She turns and walks down the short hallway toward her master bedroom. I remain at the dining table watching the empty corridor. I had come here to warn her and to gather a witness against Bradley, but I can tell by the deliberate shift in her demeanor that Ruth is about to offer me something much more valuable. When a mother finally stops protecting a criminal son, she becomes the most dangerous adversary he could possibly face. I wait in the quiet house ready to receive whatever weapon she is about to hand me. The silence in the suburban house feels incredibly heavy. I sit perfectly still at the small dining table listening to the muffled sounds of drawers opening and closing down the hall. The grandfather clock in the corner ticks with a slow, agonizing rhythm. Minutes ago, I had walked into this home expecting a hostile defense. Now I am sitting in the epicenter of a mother's shattered reality. I keep my hands resting lightly on my leather portfolio, my mind racing through the tactical implications of what might happen next. Footsteps echo on the hardwood floor. Ruth emerges from the corridor. The transformation in her posture is jarring. The defensive, proud woman who had answered the door is completely gone. She looks incredibly frail, her shoulders bowed under the sudden crushing weight of the truth. But there is also a profound, undeniable clarity in her eyes. The illusion of her golden child has burned away, leaving only cold, hard facts. In her hands, she carries a small, matte black, rectangular object. It is a solid-state external hard drive encased in a heavy-duty military-grade protective shell featuring a numeric keypad on the top. It looks completely out of place in her cozy, floral-decorated living room. Ruth walks slowly back to the dining table. She does not sit down. Instead, she gently places the heavy device directly in the center of the wooden table, right next to the bank statements that prove her son's profound betrayal. Bradley came here last Thursday, Ruth says, her voice stripped of all emotion, echoing in the quiet room. It was nearly midnight. He was pacing the floor, sweating, acting completely erratic. He looked like a man who was being hunted. He brought this with him. I looked down at the armored drive, my pulse quickening. A physical hardware encrypted storage device hidden off-site. In the world of high-stakes financial crimes, this is the holy grail. This is the ledger. What did he tell you? I asked quietly. He told me it contained highly sensitive corporate algorithms for a new tech venture. Ruth explains, her gaze fixed on the black box. He said he was negotiating a massive buyout and suspected his competitors were trying to hack his home network. He begged me to hide it in my personal floor safe. He grabbed my hands, looked me dead in the eyes, and told me his life depended on keeping it safe. He said if anything happened to this drive, his entire future would be destroyed. A bitter, hollow laugh escapes her lips. I believed him, Cassidy. I believed him because he is my son, and I have spent 33 years making excuses for his behavior. But looking at these bank statements, seeing what he did to my pension, to fund that woman's offshore accounts, I finally understand. There is no corporate buyout. There is no tech venture. This drive does not contain business algorithms. It contains his crimes. Ruth reaches out and pushes the hard drive across the polished wood until it rests right in front of me. I cannot protect a criminal, she states, her voice breaking, but her resolve absolute. I can survive losing my retirement. I can figure out how to keep my house. But I cannot live with myself if I cover for a man who would ruin his own mother just to buy luxury handbags for a con artist. Take it. I reach out and place my hand over the cold metal casing of the drive. It is incredibly heavy. This is not just a storage device. It is a digital vault. Bradley had been arrogant enough to steal from me and his mother, but he was clearly terrified of Paige. He knew exactly what she was capable of, and he had created an insurance policy. He had backed up their entire fraudulent enterprise and hidden it in the one place he thought Paige would never look. He wanted collateral just in case his new wife decided to turn on him. I look up at Ruth. The profound sacrifice she is making is not lost on me. Handing over this drive means willingly handing her only son over to federal authorities. It is an act of devastating courage. Ruth, I say, my tone carrying absolute sincerity, I am going to take this directly to a federal investigator. Bradley is going to face the full consequences of what he has done. I cannot stop that. But I promise you, I will make sure the authorities know you had no part in his schemes. I will do everything in my power to freeze that offshore account and recover your pension before the bank forecloses on this house. Ruth nods slowly, wrapping her arms around her waist, as if trying to hold herself together. Just do what you have to do, Cassidy. Burn it all down. I slip the heavy encrypted hard drive into my leather portfolio, securing it next to the forged court documents. I stand up, offer Ruth one final nod of deep respect, and walk out the front door. The autumn air hits my face sharp and invigorating. I walk down the concrete path to my car, the weight of the portfolio anchoring me to the ground. Bradley thought he had outsmarted everyone. He thought his mother would blindly protect him forever. He fundamentally underestimated the wrath of the women he chose to betray. I slide into the driver's seat, lock the doors, and immediately pull out my phone. I have the physical map to Paige's entire underworld. I dial Jamal's secure number, ready to tear her kingdom apart. I keep my foot pressed firmly on the accelerator, navigating the darkening suburban streets until I reach Kendra and Jamal's house. I do not bother ringing the doorbell. I use the spare key Kendra gave me years ago and walk straight down the hall to the fortified home office. Jamal is exactly where I left him, bathed in the blue light of his monitors running background algorithms on the offshore shell company. I drop my leather portfolio onto his desk. I pull out the matte black heavy-duty external drive and set it down next to his keyboard. Jamal stops typing immediately. He stares at the device, leaning forward to inspect the military-grade casing and the numeric keypad integrated into the top shell. He lets out a low, impressed whistle. Where exactly did you get a hardware-encrypted biometric-shielded data vault? Bradley forced his mother to hide it in her floor safe last week, I explain, taking a seat beside him. He told her his life depended on keeping it secure. I think he was terrified that his new wife might turn on him, so he made a backup of their entire operation. This is the ledger, Jamal. Everything Paige has done, every forged signature, every wire transfer, it is all locked inside that box. Jamal picks up the drive, turning it over in his hands. Bradley did not encrypt this himself. He is not smart enough. This is professional-grade paranoia. It is going to take a federal-level brute force attack to bypass the fail-safes without triggering a core wipe. If I enter the wrong sequence too many times, the drive will automatically incinerate its own data. Can you crack it? I ask, my voice steady. Jamal smiles, a sharp, confident flash in the dim room. I break into international syndicates for a living, Cassidy. I can open Bradley's little insurance policy. It is just going to take some time. He reaches into a lower drawer, pulling out a specialized interface cable and connecting the drive to a standalone air-gapped terminal on his desk. As his fingers begin flying across the keyboard, launching decryption protocols, my personal cell phone vibrates in my pocket. I pull it out, expecting an update from my managing partner. Instead, I find a string of text messages from an encrypted masked number. You think you are so smart. You are going to lose everything. I will make sure you never work in this city again. Watch your back. I stare at the screen. Paige is escalating. She has clearly realized that the viral video did not force me into an immediate panic-stricken submission. I have not called her. I have not begged for a truce. My absolute silence is driving her insane. She is losing the narrative control she thrives on, and it is making her reckless. I show the messages to Kendra, who has just walked into the office carrying 2 mugs of coffee. She reads the screen, her jaw tightening. She is getting desperate, Kendra says, handing me a mug. She knows the public outrage has a ticking clock, and you are not playing along. Before I can respond, my secondary work phone, an entirely separate device issued by my firm, emits a piercing, high-pitched alarm. It is an emergency push notification from the Chief Information Security Officer at my wealth management group. My blood runs cold. I open the alert. Someone is actively launching a crude, aggressive cyber attack against my specific sector of the firm's private servers. They are initiating a massive distributed denial-of-service attack while simultaneously attempting to brute force the password gateways on my personal client communication logs. Paige is not just sending angry text messages anymore. She is hiring amateur hackers to breach my professional infrastructure. She is trying to digitally wipe out any correspondence, any financial footprints, and any potential evidence I might have gathered against her. She wants to scorch the earth before I can build a defense. I read the security alert aloud to Jamal. He does not stop typing, but his eyes narrow. She is panicking, Jamal says, his voice tight with concentration, as lines of green code scroll rapidly down his monitor. She realizes Bradley left digital tracks when he forged your signature. She is trying to crash your servers to destroy the origination logs. It is a messy amateur move, but if she overloads your firm's firewalls, It could trigger an automated server wipe to protect client data. How much time do we have before my firm locks me out completely? I ask, calculating the devastating professional fallout if my client's data is compromised because of my personal vendetta. Jamal's fingers move at a blistering pace. His dual processors are humming loudly, the cooling fans kicking into overdrive to handle the immense computational strain of hacking the physical drive. The progress bar on his decryption software is crawling forward at an agonizingly slow pace. I need 20 minutes, Jamal states, his gaze locked on the screen. The encryption algorithm Bradley used is cycling its defense mechanisms. I have to spoof the biometric signature while simultaneously running a dictionary attack on the numeric sequence. If I move too fast, the drive melts down. My work phone pings again. The IT department is threatening to sever my network access entirely to contain the breach. I quickly type a response authorizing them to lock down my external communication ports, but begging them to keep the internal servers active for just half an hour. I am risking my entire career betting everything on the contents of the black box sitting on Jamal's desk. Another anonymous text message lights up my personal phone. You should have signed the contract. Now you burn. I ignore it, keeping my eyes fixed on Jamal's monitor. The tension in the room is suffocating. Kendra stands perfectly still, her hands gripping the back of Jamal's chair. The cooling fans whine louder. The decryption software hits 80%, then stutters, the progress bar flashing a warning yellow. Jamal curses under his breath, his hands flying across the keyboard to inject a stabilization code. Hold together, he mutters, his eyes darting between the command terminal and the physical drive. Just hold together for 10 more seconds. My work phone begins to ring. It is Thomas, my managing partner. The firewall is failing. Paige's hired hackers are breaking through the outer perimeter. I do not answer the call. I simply watch the screen. 90%. 95. The mechanical clicking of Jamal's keyboard sounds like a countdown timer. The red warning lights on his monitor flash aggressively. Paige is throwing everything she has at my servers, trying to erase her crimes. 99%. A sharp physical click echoes through the quiet room. It comes directly from the black metal casing of the hard drive on the desk. A small LED light on the device suddenly shifts from an angry locked red to a steady, solid green. Jamal exhales a sharp, triumphant breath and slams the enter key one final time. We are in, he announces, his voice echoing in the sudden stillness of the room. The vault is open. Jamal clicks the master directory on his screen. A dizzying array of nested folders populates his massive central monitor. He bypasses the obvious superficial files and dives straight into the raw transaction logs hidden deep within the partitioned sectors of the drive. I stand directly over his shoulder, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Kendra leans in close beside me, her eyes scanning the overwhelming volume of complex financial data materializing before us. This is not just a backup of your stolen mortgage, Jamal states, his voice dropping an octave as the true scale of the digital operation reveals itself. He opens a master spreadsheet containing thousands of itemized, highly obscured wire transfers. Paige is running a fully operational money laundering syndicate. I stare at the screen in absolute disbelief. The numbers scrolling past us represent millions of dollars moving through an intricate maze of global financial institutions. Jamal Cross references the routing numbers with the offshore accounts he identified earlier. He explains that Paige has been establishing fake educational trusts and fraudulent charitable organizations for years. She uses these fabricated entities to wash dirty money for unknown third-party clients, taking a hefty percentage for herself before funneling the clean cash into her untraceable Cayman Islands accounts. The tuition scam she ran on her previous husbands was just a sophisticated mechanism to secure initial seed money and build a legitimate facade for her vast network of shell companies. My work phone vibrates aggressively on the desk, the screen flashing a final critical warning from my firm's IT department. Paige's hired hackers are seconds away from breaching my client communication logs. I reach over and power the device completely off. I do not care about my server access anymore. Paige can wipe my corporate emails into oblivion. She can erase every digital trace I possess at the firm. It no longer matters. I am staring at the ultimate kill switch. But there is a massive catch. Jamal says his fingers flying across the mechanical keyboard to isolate a specific batch of digital authorization certificates. He pulls up a master ledger detailing the most recent string of international transfers, including the $400,000 stolen from my profile, and the funds maliciously drained from Ruth's pension. Look at the execution protocols, Jamal says, pointing to a column of encrypted alphanumeric codes. Paige built the entire laundering infrastructure, but she completely insulated herself from the actual execution phase. She needed a scapegoat to officially authorize the movement of the dirty money. She needed someone whose financial history looked legitimate enough to pass basic banking scrutiny, but someone arrogant and foolish enough to sign highly complex documents without actually understanding them. She used Bradley, I say, the realization hitting me with the force of a physical blow. Jamal nods grimly. He opens a hidden subfolder filled with hundreds of digital authorization receipts. Bradley's electronic signature is stamped on every single illegal transfer. His IP address is permanently logged in the metadata. His device identifiers are baked into the foundational architecture of the fraudulent wires. Paige convinced him to act as the primary financial director for all of her illicit shell companies. Bradley probably thought he was managing a brilliant new tech venture, exactly like he told his mother. Instead, he was officially legally authorizing federal money laundering on a massive scale. Kendra covers her mouth in horror. She set him up to take the fall for a federal syndicate. If the authorities investigate these accounts, Bradley is the only one left holding the smoking gun. He is legally implicated in dozens of severe federal financial crimes. Jamal confirms initiating a secure, air-gapped backup protocol to clone the entire drive. The paper trail points directly to him. Paige remains completely invisible on the domestic side. If she divorces him tomorrow, he goes to federal prison for 20 years, and she walks away with millions in washed cash. She orchestrated the perfect crime. I look at the undeniable proof of my ex-husband's profound stupidity. Bradley had allowed his bruised ego and his desperate need for validation to turn him into the ultimate fall guy for a master criminal. He had stolen my financial identity. He had financially ruined his own mother. He was actively trying to destroy my professional career. He absolutely deserved to face the devastating consequences of his reckless actions. But I refused to let Paige walk away clean. She orchestrated the public destruction of my name, and I am going to make sure she burns right alongside him in the very fire she started. Print the authorization logs linking Bradley to the offshore accounts, I instruct Jamal, my voice cold and entirely unwavering. Print the structural blueprints of the entire money laundering ring. We are going to compile a dossier so legally airtight that the federal prosecutors will not even have to work for their convictions. Jamal initiates the printing sequence. What is the strategy here? Cassidy. Handing this drive to my agency will trigger an immediate federal raid on their house. We can have them in federal custody by tomorrow morning. A quiet arrest in the suburbs is far too kind for what Paige attempted to do to me, I reply, pacing the length of the home office as the printer hums to life. She wanted a massive public spectacle. She wanted to brand me as a financial abuser in front of the entire world. She used the concept of charity and victimhood as a weapon to destroy me. I'm going to use it as her execution block. Kendra looks at me, a sharp, anticipating smile forming on her lips. What exactly are you planning? I pull my personal cell phone from my pocket. Despite the ongoing barrage of hate mail generated by Paige's viral video, I open my calendar application. I know exactly what Paige has planned for tomorrow evening. Emboldened by her massive influx of stolen cash and her newfound viral fame, she has organized a lavish high society charity gala at the Grand Monarch Hotel. The irony makes my stomach turn. She titled the event, "Protecting Single Mothers from Financial Abuse." She is using the money she stole from me and Ruth to fund a luxurious party dedicated entirely to demonizing me. Paige is hosting a major gala tomorrow night. I tell my sister and brother-in-law, watching the freshly printed, highly classified evidence slide out of Jamal's machine. The entire Chicago elite will be there. The media will be covering the event live. She plans to stand on a stage and solidify her status as a hero. I step forward and pick up the thick stack of damning financial records, feeling the absolute heavy weight of their destruction resting securely in my hands. I am going to attend that gala. I state a calm, lethal certainty settling deep into my bones. And I am going to ensure that every single person in that ballroom sees exactly where their money is really going. I am going to tear her empire down while she is standing right in the middle of it. The Grand Monarch Hotel is an architectural masterpiece of gold leaf and imported marble resting in the very center of downtown Chicago. It is the type of venue where the city elite gather to display their wealth under the guise of philanthropy. Reserving the main ballroom on a Friday evening requires a minimum deposit of $75,000. Paige had spared absolutely no expense for her grand public coronation. Jamal had intercepted the digital invitation the previous night. The irony of the event was so staggering it practically knocked the breath out of my lungs. Paige had titled her lavish gathering Protecting Single Mothers from Financial Abuse. She was hosting a high society charity gala dedicated to my destruction. She had invited local politicians, prominent socialites, and several major media outlets. She planned to stand on a stage, draped in imported orchids, and solicit donations for women who had been financially victimized by cruel ex-spouses. And she was funding this entire sickening spectacle using the $400,000 she stole from my financial profile and the completely liquidated retirement pension of her own mother-in-law. Paige believed she had successfully insulated herself in a fortress of stolen wealth and public sympathy. She assumed I was sitting alone in my apartment, paralyzed by the viral backlash, watching my career slowly bleed out. She had absolutely no idea that I was already inside the building. When you manage the financial portfolios for the top 1% of the city, you do not need to sneak through a loading dock or bribe a security guard. You simply make a phone call to the man who owns the hospitality group that manages the hotel. A brief conversation with one of my oldest clients was all it took. He did not ask for details. He simply understood that I required absolute undocumented access to the venue for a private matter. 10 minutes after I arrived at the subterranean VIP entrance, the general manager personally handed me a master security keycard. He gave me a polite nod, turned around and walked away, ensuring my presence remained entirely off the official guest registry. I was not dressed for a gala. I wore a tailored pitch-black pantsuit and soft-soled leather shoes. I looked exactly like a high-level event coordinator, invisible and authoritative. I slipped the heavy silver USB drive into my interior jacket pocket. Jamal had meticulously loaded the drive with every single piece of evidence we extracted from Bradley's encrypted vault. I swiped the master keycard and stepped into the labyrinth of service corridors that hummed behind the walls of the luxury hotel. The backstage areas were a stark contrast to the opulence out front. Bare concrete floors exposed industrial pipes, and the frantic energy of dozens of catering staff rushing silver trays of champagne toward the service doors. I moved through the chaos with total purpose, my expression sharp and unyielding. Whenever a staff member glanced my way, my confident stride immediately convinced them I belonged exactly where I was. I took a specialized service elevator up to the mezzanine level, stepping out onto a narrow carpeted catwalk that overlooked the main ballroom. I stayed in the shadows, looking down through the architectural cutouts at the spectacular fraud unfolding below me. The ballroom was breathtaking. Enormous crystal chandeliers cast a warm, flattering light over round tables covered in pristine white silk. Towers of white roses served as centerpieces. Waiters in crisp black ties navigated the room, pouring vintage wine for Chicago's wealthiest donors. And right in the center of the room, holding court like a conquering queen, was Paige. She wore a modest but incredibly expensive designer dress, carefully chosen to make her look elegant yet approachable. She was smiling, placing her hand over her heart, accepting the sympathetic hugs and admiring handshakes of the elite guests. She was playing the role of the brave survivor flawlessly. I spotted Bradley standing a few feet behind her. He held a glass of scotch, his posture stiff and his smile painfully forced. He looked exhausted. He looked like a man trying to convince himself that he was part of the victory even as his wife completely eclipsed him. He was standing in a room paid for by his mother's ruined future, watching his new wife bask in the glory of the money he had stolen for her. He had no idea that Paige was already planning her exit strategy, ready to leave him holding the federal bag the second the event was over. I watched them for a long moment, feeling the cold, heavy weight of the USB drive resting against my chest. They were celebrating a triumph built entirely on a foundation of lies, theft, and profound betrayal. They had invited the city to watch my execution. I was simply going to change the programming. I stepped away from the viewing platform and continued down the dimly lit corridor toward the rear of the ballroom. My destination was the primary audio-visual control suite. The Grand Monarch possessed state-of-the-art presentation technology. The control room managed the massive LED screens behind the main stage, the sophisticated sound system, and the live broadcasting feeds intended for the local media networks covering the charity event. I navigated the winding hallway, my soft-soled shoes making absolutely no sound against the thick carpet. The ambient noise from the ballroom grew muffled as I moved deeper into the restricted technical sector. The door to the control suite loomed ahead, marked by a glowing red security panel. I knew Paige would have taken precautions. She had likely instructed Bradley to hire private security to monitor the event, terrified that I might show up at the front doors to cause a scene. She wanted to control the perimeter to ensure her narrative remained perfectly unchallenged. I pulled the master keycard from my pocket. My hand was perfectly steady. I did not feel fear. I did not feel hesitation. I felt the cold, undeniable clarity of absolute justice. I tapped the card against the scanner. A soft click echoed in the quiet hallway, and the heavy acoustic door unlatched. I pushed it open and stepped into the nerve center of Paige's grand illusion, ready to dismantle her entire universe pixel by pixel. The glowing red light on the security panel shifted to a solid green as I held the master keycard against the scanner. I placed my hand on the heavy brass handle of the audio-visual control suite, ready to push it open. Before I could apply pressure, the sharp, unmistakable crackling of a two-way radio echoed from the adjacent corridor. "Check the secondary server closets on the mezzanine level," a gruff, authoritative voice commanded. "The client wants every single access point locked down tight. No unauthorized personnel near the stage equipment." I instantly pulled my hand back from the door. Bradley had actually done it. His fragile ego and overwhelming paranoia had driven him to hire aggressive private security for a charity gala. He was terrified that I might show up and throw a glass of wine or scream at him in the lobby. He was preparing for a petty domestic dispute while completely oblivious to the federal execution I was about to deliver. I slipped silently away from the control room door, retreating into a deeply shadowed alcove housing a bank of industrial circuit breakers. I pressed my back flat against the cold concrete wall, holding my breath as the heavy, rhythmic thud of combat boots approached. Two men dressed in sharp, tactical black suits rounded the corner. They were not standard hotel security. They moved with the rigid, hyper-vigilant discipline of expensive private contractors. Bradley was burning through his mother's stolen retirement funds just to pay men to guard his own delusions. I remained perfectly motionless in the dark. The guards paused near the control room door. One of them tested the handle, confirming it was locked before keying his radio. "Mezzanine perimeter is secure," he reported, his voice reverberating off the bare concrete walls. "Moving to sweep the catering corridors now." I waited until the sound of their footsteps faded entirely into the ambient hum of the hotel's ventilation system. The moment the hallway was clear, I stepped out of the alcove and moved swiftly back toward the control suite. But the backstage of a major hotel is a living, breathing ecosystem, and my window of isolation was closing rapidly. A third security contractor emerged from a stairwell just 30 feet ahead of me, his eyes locking directly onto my position. I did not freeze. I did not turn around and run. Running is an admission of guilt. I immediately grabbed a discarded catering clipboard resting on a nearby service cart. I stared down at the blank pages, furrowed my brow, and marched straight toward the guard with the furious, irritated energy of a senior event coordinator who was running severely behind schedule. "Excuse me," I snapped, not breaking my stride and not making eye contact as I walked right past him. "The floral arrangements for the VIP tables are completely wrong. If the client sees those hydrangeas, we are all getting fired." The guard instinctively stepped aside, pressing himself against the wall to let me pass. "My apologies, ma'am," he muttered, completely fooled by my absolute projection of authority. "Act like you own the building, and people will literally hold the doors open for you." I did not look back. I reached the audio-visual control suite for the second time, tapped the master keycard against the scanner, and pushed the heavy acoustic door open. I slipped inside and immediately let the door glide shut behind me. I threw the manual deadbolt and slid the heavy steel security chain firmly into place. The room was secure. The control suite was a massive sensory deprivation chamber compared to the dazzling gala unfolding outside. It was dark, illuminated only by the glow of dozens of high-definition monitors, massive digital soundboards, and the towering projection mainframe server rack humming in the corner. Through the thick, soundproof observation glass that spanned the length of the room, I had a perfect, unobstructed bird's-eye view of the entire ballroom and the main stage. The suite was currently empty. The hotel's lead technician was likely down on the floor conducting a final microphone check before the speeches began. I had a very narrow window before he returned to his station. I moved directly to the central command console. The interface was a complex maze of broadcasting software designed for stadium-level presentations. It would have been completely overwhelming for an amateur, but Jamal had anticipated this exact technical hurdle. During our late-night planning sessions, he had given me a rigorous crash course in bypassing commercial media firewalls. I reached into the interior pocket of my blazer and pulled out the heavy silver USB drive. The metal felt warm against my palm. This small device contained the absolute destruction of Paige's entire fabricated universe. I located the primary override port on the master projection server. I firmly inserted the drive. The massive central monitor on the desk flickered, instantly recognizing the foreign device. A red security prompt flashed on the screen, demanding an administrator password. I did not hesitate. I typed in the backdoor federal override code Jamal had programmed into the drive's root directory. The system accepted the command instantly. The firewall collapsed and a hidden window blossomed across the main screen, displaying the meticulously organized contents of my digital armory. There were the forged mortgage documents featuring Bradley's fabricated signature. There were the routing schematics showing the exact trajectory of the stolen $400,000 bouncing through cryptocurrency exchanges to land in the Cayman Islands. There were Paige's unsealed bankruptcy filings from her previous marriages, and there, shining brightly in high definition, were the banking records proving Bradley had completely liquidated his elderly mother's pension. My hands moved swiftly across the soundboard. I isolated the video output channels, routing the data from my USB drive directly to the colossal LED screens positioned directly behind the main stage. I completely bypassed the standard preview monitors, ensuring that when the files launched, they would broadcast instantly to the entire room without any technical delay. Next, I isolated the primary audio amplifier matrix, linking it to the crystal-clear recording I had made at the coffee shop. I placed my index finger gently over the master execution key on the keyboard. Down below, the ambient lighting in the ballroom began to dim. A hush fell over the elite crowd as the string quartet stopped playing. The brilliant, blinding white glare of a single spotlight cut through the darkness, illuminating the center of the stage. Through the soundproof glass, I watched Paige walk up the carpeted steps, her champagne silk gown catching the light perfectly. She stepped up to the microphone, her face a mask of elegant, calculated bravery. She looked out at the sea of wealthy donors, fully preparing to paint me as a monster to the entire world. I stood alone in the dark, silent control room above her, locked in, fully armed and waiting patiently for my cue. The applause thundered through the thick, soundproof glass of the control suite, a massive wave of adoration from Chicago's highest society. Paige adjusted the microphone stand, letting the overwhelming approval wash over her for a few extra seconds to build the dramatic anticipation. 3 professional television cameras, clearly marked with the logos of major local news networks, were positioned at the perimeter of the ballroom. Their red recording lights glowed steadily in the dim lighting. She was broadcasting her elaborate lies live to the entire city. Paige took a deep, shuddering breath, her shoulders rising and falling in a perfectly choreographed display of vulnerability. "Thank you," she whispered into the microphone. Her voice trembled just enough to sound authentic, echoing beautifully through the venue's massive speaker system. "Thank you all so much for being here tonight." She gripped the edges of the wooden podium, looking out over the sea of wealthy donors. "When I started planning this gala, I was terrified. I am just a mother. I am just a woman trying to protect her 2 young boys. Standing up to the financial elite, to the people who control the money and the power in this city, feels like fighting a war you are destined to lose. I watched her from the dark shadows of the control suite. It was a masterclass in psychological manipulation. Down below, the audience hung on her every single word. I saw prominent local politicians nodding in solemn agreement. I saw wealthy philanthropists dabbing their eyes with linen napkins. Bradley stood off to the side of the stage, his hands clasped respectfully in front of him, playing the role of the supportive, emasculated husband perfectly. Financial abuse leaves no visible bruises. Paige continued, wiping a single calculated tear from her cheek. It is a silent violence. It happens in hidden bank accounts and sterile courtrooms. A few months ago, my family became the target of a ruthless, vindictive wealth manager. My husband's ex-wife decided that because she possessed millions, she had the right to play God with our lives. She used her corporate power to freeze the educational trust fund we had meticulously scraped together for my sons. She decided that out of pure spite, my innocent children deserved to be thrown out onto the street. A collective murmur of outrage rippled through the grand ballroom. The camera operator zoomed in tightly on Paige's face, capturing her manufactured anguish in high definition. She thinks because she wears expensive suits and controls vast portfolios that she is completely untouchable. Paige's voice rose, shifting seamlessly from sorrow to righteous indignation. She thinks that mothers like me, women who prioritize family over corporate greed, are weak and easily broken. But I am not weak, and I will not be silenced by a woman who uses her immense wealth to crush anyone who stands in her way. The crowd erupted into spontaneous applause. People were actually standing up from their tables. It was a roaring standing ovation for a serial grifter who was actively laundering stolen money through the very charity event she was currently promoting. The sheer audacity of her performance was staggering to witness. I looked down at the central command console. My wireless master audio-visual remote rested right beside the keyboard. It was a sleek, heavy digital device that allowed full manual control over the visual transitions on the massive LED screens mounted behind the stage. I picked it up, feeling the cool metal against my palm. I synced it to the main projection server, ensuring a flawless, immediate connection. Paige raised her hands, signaling the wealthy crowd to quiet down so she could deliver her grand finale. She stepped out from behind the podium, moving gracefully into the absolute center of the stage. The bright spotlight tracked her flawlessly. "We are here tonight to send a message," Paige declared, pointing a dramatic, trembling finger straight out toward the back of the audience. "We are here to tell the financial abusers of the world, the people who hide in the shadows and steal from innocent families, that we see you. We are not afraid of you anymore. And your reign of terror ends tonight." It was the perfect cue. I did not press the execution button on the console just yet. I quietly unlocked the heavy steel security chain on the suite door. I pushed the acoustic door open and stepped out of the control room, walking directly onto the exposed VIP viewing balcony that hovered high over the rear of the grand ballroom. I raised my hand and signaled the lighting technician stationed on the opposite catwalk, a man I had generously compensated on my way up the service elevator. He instantly threw a secondary high-intensity spotlight directly onto my position. The blinding beam of pure white light hit me. I stood at the very edge of the balcony, perfectly framed against the dark wood paneling, staring down at the hundreds of faces turning rapidly toward the sudden illumination. My tailored black pantsuit cut a sharp, commanding silhouette against the darkness. I held the master remote loosely in my right hand, resting my arm on the balcony railing. The entire ballroom gasped in unison. The synchronized turning of hundreds of heads created a physical wave of sound that rushed up toward the ceiling. The television cameras instantly pivoted away from the stage, their heavy lenses zooming in directly on me. Paige froze completely on the stage. Her arm was still extended, her pointing finger suspended uselessly in the air. The color drained from her face so rapidly she looked like a porcelain statue. Bradley stumbled backward, nearly knocking over a massive floral arrangement. His mouth hung open in absolute, unadulterated terror as he stared up at the balcony. I did not shout. I did not need to raise my voice or defend myself against her fabricated claims. I simply stood there, radiating absolute, unwavering control over the entire room. I looked down at Paige, meeting her terrified gaze across the vast expanse of the silent ballroom. She had wanted me to step out of the shadows. She had wanted to summon the ultimate villain for her audience. She had absolutely no idea what kind of monster she had just invited to her party. I pressed my thumb down firmly on the master execution key. The transition was instantaneous and utterly brutal. The massive 50-foot LED screens dominating the stage behind Paige flickered for a fraction of a second. The elegant gold-lettered logo of her fabricated charity vanished entirely. In its place, blazing in crisp, undeniable high definition, appeared the digital architecture of her criminal underworld. The first image to illuminate the grand ballroom was the forged $400,000 mortgage application. Jamal had highlighted the metadata in a glowing fluorescent red drawing, a direct indisputable line from my stolen financial profile to Bradley's digital signature. Beside it, a second document materialized. It was the corporate registry for the offshore shell company in the Cayman Islands. The text was magnified so large that even the guests in the very back row could read it perfectly. The registry clearly listed Paige as the sole proprietor, sole director, and exclusive beneficiary of the stolen funds. The collective silence in the room stretched until it felt like the air itself might shatter. Hundreds of wealthy donors, local politicians, and media personnel stared up at the screens, their brains desperately trying to reconcile the weeping, victimized mother on stage with the cold, hard federal evidence towering behind her. Paige spun around. She looked up at the towering LED display and her knees physically buckled. She staggered, grabbing the wooden podium to keep herself from collapsing onto the floor. She frantically tapped the microphone, opening her mouth to scream, to deny it, to spin another lie, but I had already severed her audio feed at the source. The podium microphone was completely dead. She was voiceless. The presentation advanced with ruthless, automated precision. The screens wiped clean and instantly populated with unsealed federal bankruptcy filings from Arizona and Florida. Massive side-by-side photographs of Paige's two previous husbands appeared on the display, accompanied by highlighted court dockets detailing the exact same tuition fund scam she had used to financially ruin them. A bright red timeline scrolled across the bottom of the screens, illustrating her documented pattern of serial extraction. She was not a victim. She was a professional predator, and her entire hunting history was now being broadcast live to the local news networks. Whispers began to break out across the ballroom. The whispers rapidly escalated into shouts of outrage and disgust. The elite mothers who had blindly supported her began backing away from the stage as if she were carrying a plague. The camera operators down on the floor did not hesitate. They swiveled their heavy lenses, zooming in close on the documents, and then panning aggressively back to Paige's horrified, trapped expression. Then the final, most devastating visual materialized. The screens shifted to display the official bank statements belonging to the Illinois State Teachers' Retirement System. It was Ruth's pension. Jamal had formatted the presentation to show the terrifying speed at which the account had been drained. A massive red graph plummeted from a lifetime of security down to absolute zero. Directly below the graph, the transfer logs proved that the elderly woman's life savings had been funneled straight into Paige's offshore treasury. The ballroom erupted. This was a crowd of people who understood money, who understood legacy, and who understood the sacred boundary of protecting family wealth. Stealing from an ex-wife was a scandal. Methodically bankrupting an elderly mother to fund a fake charity gala was an unforgivable, sickening taboo. Bradley, who had been frozen in terror by the side of the stage, suddenly took a step forward. He stared up at the screens, his eyes darting frantically between the Cayman Islands corporate registry and the zero balance on his mother's pension fund. I watched the exact moment his arrogant, fragile mind finally processed the reality of his situation. He saw Paige's name listed as the sole owner of the offshore accounts. He realized he had committed federal wire fraud, destroyed my financial profile, and ruined his own mother, all for a woman who had completely locked him out of the vault. He had been played for an absolute fool. But I was not finished. Visual evidence was powerful, but I wanted to strip away the very last shred of Paige's manufactured innocence. I swept my fingers across the digital soundboard on my console, pushing the primary amplifier matrix to maximum volume. The crystal-clear audio recording from our morning meeting at the coffee shop blasted through the stadium-level speakers, vibrating the crystal chandeliers hanging from the ceiling. Paige's smug, taunting voice boomed across the chaotic ballroom, echoing with terrifying clarity. Come on, Cassidy, you are rich. 400,000 is pocket change for a wealth manager like you. Just pay for my kid's future, and we will let you go back to your sad, lonely, career-obsessed little life. Consider it a donation to a real family. The contrast between the weeping, fragile woman who had stood on that stage just 3 minutes ago and the malicious, greedy extortionist echoing through the speakers was absolute. The final nail had been driven into the coffin. The grand ballroom descended into total unmitigated pandemonium. Guests were shouting, knocking over chairs as they scrambled away from the tables. Several prominent politicians were already rushing for the exits, desperately trying to shield their faces from the media cameras to avoid being associated with a federal money laundering syndicate. Reporters were shouting questions over the chaos, their flashes firing in rapid, blinding bursts. On the stage, Paige was hyperventilating. She looked wildly around the room, her carefully curated empire burning to ash right in front of her eyes. She looked up at the VIP balcony, meeting my gaze one final time. I stood perfectly still in the blinding spotlight, my face a mask of absolute unyielding stone. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I simply watched the destruction I had unleashed. Bradley let out a raw, furious scream that cut through the noise of the crowd. His face was contorted with blind, primal rage. He lunged across the stage, closing the distance between himself and his wife in 3 massive strides. Bradley stood paralyzed at the edge of the stage. The brilliant light from the massive LED screens washed over his pale, sweating face. He was not looking at the crowd, and he was not looking at me. His eyes were locked in a frantic, desperate trance on the digital documents towering above him. He stared at the corporate registry for the Cayman Islands Shell Company. He read Paige's name listed as the sole proprietor, the sole director, and the exclusive beneficiary of the offshore accounts. He saw the cold, hard proof that he possessed absolutely zero legal authority over the $400,000 he had stolen by forging my signature. Then his gaze drifted to the adjacent screen. He stared at the red graph documenting the complete liquidation of his mother's retirement pension. The reality of his situation crashed down on him with the devastating force of a collapsing building. For the past 2 years, Bradley had built his entire identity around being Paige's heroic provider. He had destroyed our marriage, stolen my financial profile, and secretly bankrupted his own elderly mother, all to satisfy the relentless financial demands of a woman who promised him adoration and respect. He truly believed they were partners. He believed he was the mastermind, securing their lavish future. In a matter of seconds, the screens behind him revealed the sickening truth. He was never her partner. He was her shield. Paige had methodically manipulated his massive, fragile ego, setting him up to take the sole legal fall for a string of federal felonies, while she secured the stolen cash in an impenetrable offshore fortress. He had thrown his life away for a woman who was actively planning to leave him holding the bag for a 20-year federal prison sentence. Something inside Bradley fundamentally snapped. The polished executive mask he had worn all evening shattered into a million jagged pieces. He let out a raw, guttural scream that echoed over the chaotic murmurs of the grand ballroom. It was not a shout of denial or a plea for help. It was the sound of a man's sanity completely breaking. He spun around and lunged across the stage. Paige barely had time to turn her head before Bradley crashed into her. He did not care about the hundreds of wealthy donors watching. He did not care about the 3 professional television cameras broadcasting the event live across the city. He grabbed Paige by the shoulders of her expensive champagne silk gown, his fingers digging violently into the fabric. He shoved her backward with terrifying force, slamming her against the heavy wooden podium. The microphone stand toppled over, crashing onto the hardwood stage with a deafening screech of audio feedback. "You set me up!" Bradley roared, his face contorted with blind, primal rage. "You used me! You took my mother's money! You made me sign those wire transfers!" Paige shrieked, batting her hands wildly against his chest. She stumbled her designer heels, catching on the carpeted stage, but Bradley refused to let go. He shook her violently, his composure entirely gone. The elegant charity gala instantly devolved into a horrifying public display of domestic violence fueled by the exposure of federal crimes. The elite crowd in this ballroom erupted into pure panic. Wealthy socialites shrieked and scrambled backward, knocking over silk-covered chairs and shattering crystal champagne flutes in their desperate rush to get away from the stage. The camera operators down on the floor did not flinch. They kept their heavy lenses locked firmly on the physical altercation, capturing every second of the violent implosion for the evening news. The woman who had just spent 10 minutes crying about financial abuse was now being physically attacked by her co-conspirator in front of the entire world. The private security contractors Bradley had hired to guard the perimeter finally reacted. 3 men in tactical black suits shoved their way through the panicking crowd sprinting toward the stage to pull their own client off his wife. But before the guards could even reach the first step of the stage, a sound like a thunderclap shattered the chaos. The massive heavy oak doors at the main entrance of the grand ballroom were thrown open with explosive force. They hit the adjacent walls with a resounding crash that made the fleeing donors freeze in their tracks. Through the open doorway strode my brother-in-law, Jamal. He was not wearing his usual casual home office attire. He wore a dark tailored suit, and draped prominently around his neck was his federal badge gleaming under the ballroom chandeliers. He moved with the absolute terrifying authority of a federal agent executing a coordinated raid. He was not alone. Flanking him on both sides were a dozen uniformed officers from the Chicago Police Department and 2 additional federal agents wearing tactical vests. "Nobody move!" Jamal's voice boomed across the vast room, carrying a commanding resonance that instantly neutralized the private security contractors. "Federal agents, stand down immediately." The sea of wealthy donors parted instantly, pressing themselves against the walls to clear a wide path down the center aisle. Jamal marched straight down the middle of the ballroom, his eyes locked dead ahead. He did not look at the panicking politicians or the flashing media cameras. He walked with the righteous fury of a man who had spent the last 48 hours dismantling a criminal syndicate that had tried to destroy his family. The local police surged past Jamal, rushing up the steps of the stage. 2 officers grabbed Bradley, wrenching his hands away from Paige and slamming him face first onto the polished floor. Bradley thrashed and screamed, but the officers pinned him down swiftly, securing heavy steel handcuffs around his wrists. Paige staggered backward, gasping for breath, her silk gown torn at the shoulder. She looked at the officers, her eyes wide and pleading. She immediately tried to fall back on her only defense mechanism. She started to cry. "Thank God you are here," Paige sobbed, holding her hands up in a gesture of absolute surrender. "He is crazy. He forced me to do all of it. He stole that money. You have to help me." Jamal stepped up onto the stage, pulling a folded stack of warrants from his interior jacket pocket. He looked at Paige with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. "Save the tears for the judge," Jamal stated, his voice ringing with icy finality. "We have the decrypted hard drive. We have the offshore routing numbers, the Panamanian shell companies, and the unsealed bankruptcy filings from Arizona and Florida. Your entire network is completely dismantled." Paige stopped crying instantly. The fake tears vanished, replaced by a look of sheer suffocating terror as she realized her invisible empire had been burned to the ground. An officer grabbed her arms, spinning her around and securing handcuffs over her wrists. Bradley and Paige Jamal announced, projecting his voice so every camera in the room could record the official charges. "You are both under arrest for grand larceny, federal wire fraud, and international money laundering. You have the right to remain silent. I strongly suggest you use it." I stood perfectly still in the VIP viewing balcony high above the ballroom floor. The brilliant spotlight continued to illuminate me in the darkness. I watched the police drag my ex-husband and his new wife off the stage, marching them through the crowd of disgraced, horrified elites. The media cameras flashed in a relentless, blinding storm, capturing their humiliating exit for the front page of tomorrow's papers. They had invited the city to watch my public execution, but they were the ones leaving in chains. 6 months have passed since the flashing red and blue lights of the Chicago Police Department illuminated the grand facade of the hotel. The biting winter winds have finally surrendered to a crisp, bright spring. I am standing in the center of my newly acquired penthouse suite on the 45th floor, looking out through the massive pane of floor-to-ceiling glass. The deep, vast expanse of Lake Michigan stretches out before me, catching the late afternoon sunlight and reflecting it back in a dazzling array of silver and blue. I hold a heavy crystal glass in my hand, the dark red Cabernet catching the light as I gently swirl it. The quiet hum of the city below feels entirely disconnected from the absolute silence of my home. The federal trials concluded 3 weeks ago. When you hand the United States Department of Justice a fully decrypted hard drive containing offshore routing numbers, forged financial documents, and a meticulously maintained digital ledger of international money laundering, the legal process moves with terrifying, unrelenting speed. Bradley and Page did not form a united front. The moment the federal prosecutors laid the evidence on the table and outlined the mandatory minimum sentencing guidelines, their fabricated romance disintegrated into a vicious, bloodthirsty scramble for survival. They violently turned on each other the very second they realized the ship was sinking. Paige attempted to execute her usual playbook. She sat in the courtroom wearing a plain, conservative blouse, attempting to squeeze out a few strategic tears for the jury. She claimed she was just a naive, devoted mother who had been entirely manipulated by a controlling, abusive husband. She swore she had absolutely no idea where the $400,000 came from, and she pleaded total ignorance regarding the Cayman Islands shell companies registered in her name. Unfortunately for Paige, federal prosecutors do not care about theatrical tears. They care about data. Jamal had provided them with the unsealed bankruptcy filings from her previous marriages in Arizona and Florida. The prosecution painted a vivid, undeniable picture of a highly skilled predatory serial grifter who used the exact same financial mechanics to bankrupt 3 consecutive men. The jury saw right through her performance. Bradley was an even more pathetic sight on the witness stand. Completely stripped of his arrogant executive persona, he looked small, terrified, and utterly broken. When he realized that Page was actively trying to frame him as the sole mastermind of the laundering syndicate, his remaining sanity fractured. He eagerly accepted a plea deal to testify against his own wife, frantically spilling every single detail of her manipulation in a desperate bid to reduce his sentence. He admitted to forging my digital signature. He admitted to routing the funds to her offshore accounts. And most devastatingly, he admitted to liquidating his own mother's retirement pension to fund Page's extravagant demands. Watching them tear each other to shreds in a sterile federal courtroom was the ultimate closure. There was no loyalty, no love, and no honor between them. They were just 2 parasites fighting over a dying host. The federal judge showed absolutely zero mercy. The sheer audacity of using a fake charity gala dedicated to victims of financial abuse as a front to launder stolen money thoroughly disgusted the court. Both Bradley and Page received severe 20-year federal prison sentences without the possibility of early parole. They lost everything. Their assets were seized, their fraudulent trusts were dissolved, and their curated social media empire was permanently erased from the internet. The only true victim left in their wake was Ruth. Bradley's mother had indeed lost everything. The bank had seized her suburban house to cover the massive predatory line of credit her son had opened against her pension. Because she had legally granted Bradley financial power of attorney, recovering the stolen funds through civil litigation was a near impossibility. She was facing the prospect of spending her twilight years entirely destitute, paying the ultimate crushing price for her blind loyalty to a monstrous son. I refused to let an elderly woman suffer on the streets because of my ex-husband's depravity. I did not visit her again, and I never picked up the phone to call her. Instead, I contacted a specialized corporate law firm entirely unaffiliated with my own wealth management group. Using an ironclad anonymous blind trust, I quietly established a secure, modest financial safety net for Ruth. The annuity guarantees a steady, reliable monthly income, just enough to secure her a comfortable, respectable apartment in a high-quality assisted living community. The legal framework of the trust strictly prohibits anyone from discovering the identity of the benefactor. Ruth will spend the rest of her life believing that a generous, unnamed charity stepped in to save her from ruin. She will never know that the roof over her head is being paid for by the very woman her son tried to destroy. As for my own life, the fallout from the gala did not ruin my professional reputation. It amplified it to a level I had never even anticipated. Initially, my managing partner Thomas had been terrified of the public spectacle. But the financial elite of Chicago operate on a very specific set of rules. They do not respect quiet victims. They respect absolute, unyielding power. When the details of the federal indictment became public, and my high net worth clients realized exactly how I had dismantled a sophisticated money laundering ring with nothing but patience and raw data, their trust in me skyrocketed. They saw a wealth manager who was utterly ruthless, highly calculated, and entirely immune to blackmail or manipulation. They saw a woman who protected her assets with the precision of a military tactician. Instead of pulling their portfolios, my clients doubled their investments. Referrals poured in from across the globe. Within 2 months, the firm promoted me to senior executive partner, granting me total control over my own private wealth division. The viral hate campaign that Paige had tried to use to end my career had ironically catapulted me to the very top of the financial food chain. I take a slow, appreciative sip of my wine. The dark, rich flavor settles warmly in my chest. I look around my stunning minimalist penthouse. I did not inherit this space, and I did not rely on a man to provide it for me. I earned every single square inch of it through my own relentless intelligence and my absolute refusal to be a victim. Bradley and Paige had called me a monster. They had tried to paint me as the villain in their fabricated tragedy. But I know exactly who I am. I am simply the consequence of their own actions. I used nothing but the absolute truth to burn their empire of lies to the ground, leaving nothing but ash in my wake. I stand by the glass watching the city lights begin to flicker on as the evening settles over Chicago. My phone is silent. My accounts are secure. My life is entirely undeniably my own. I have never felt so completely at peace. The most profound lesson to emerge from this relentless journey is that true power does not lie in frantically defending yourself against false narratives, but in systematically dismantling those illusions with absolute undeniable truth. When faced with master manipulators who weaponize victimhood and exploit financial or emotional ties, the initial instinct is almost always to panic, to argue publicly, or to beg for basic understanding. However, surrendering to that emotional chaos only feeds the perpetrator's illusion of control. Real strength requires stepping back, compartmentalizing the immediate pain, and calculating a precise response built entirely on hard facts, rather than reactive anger. Abusers and serial grifters inherently thrive in the shadows of secrecy, societal expectations, and public pressure. They rely heavily on their targets feeling too embarrassed, isolated, or paralyzed to fight back effectively. The ultimate liberation comes from dragging their hidden actions into the harsh, unforgiving light of day. By meticulously gathering indisputable data, legally securing personal assets, and absolutely refusing to negotiate with extortionists, one can turn a carefully laid trap into the exact instrument of the abuser's own downfall. More importantly, this experience teaches us that our intrinsic worth is never defined by those who actively seek to exploit us. Walking away from deeply toxic environments is not a failure or a surrender. It is the ultimate act of self-preservation and profound courage. Take a moment today to evaluate your own boundaries and fiercely protect your hard-earned peace from anyone who tries to compromise it. Share your experiences and comment below.